So all of these middlemen are now profiting off of healthcare, and it's no longer healthcare, it's health insurance, and there might be some care. So we now just have to kind of rein those in. And I do think that PBMs have gotten out of control. I do think that there is a reason that we should still have PBMs, but we should bring them back to reasonable compensation. They are a key component of an ecosystem for the healthcare plan, but they are not at the cost that they are currently right now. They're just sucking. They're leeches, basically, for the most part.
Are you sick and tired of the high costs and inefficiency plaguing our U.S. healthcare system? Do you feel like you're navigating a maze when dealing with insurance companies, only to end up paying a fortune for basic medical services? Then this Broken Healthcare podcast is for you. So get ready to take control of your healthcare. Here's your host, Ray Kober.
And we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Broken Healthcare. My name is Ray Kober. I am your host, and I'm thrilled to have with us today Jamie Greenleaf from Fiduciary in a Box. Jamie, welcome to the big show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ray. I'm excited to have this conversation, and happy holidays.
Oh, same to you. So nobody puts baby in a corner. Why would you put something in a box?
That's a very good question. I've never thought of it that way, but it's basically trying to provide a service that's easy and is in a single spot, organized in an individual area that can be collaborative, but still found there.
Yeah, so listen, I'm only kidding. We're gonna get into all of that. But before we get into Fiduciary in a Box, which is unlike anything that I know of on the market to help folks address their fiduciary obligation under the new CAA law. I want to get to know you a little bit. So no one starts out and dives headfirst from like preschool age and says, I want to be in the insurance and healthcare industry when I grow up. I haven't met one yet. And so I'm sure that, like me, your road had some twists and turns. Tell us a little bit about your journey and where you started and how you ended up here.
Yeah, I agree with you. Nobody wants to grow up and be a fiduciary and or a consultant in the healthcare field. That's not when you ask a little kid what they want to be, that's not their number one thing, not top of mind. I actually grew up in the retirement industry. My mother was kind of a pioneer. She started a firm back in 1981 when the 401k code was kind of coming to the marketplace for employers. It allowed employers to withhold dollars from employees' paychecks to allow them to save for retirement. So for the last 30 years, I've really helped employers establish a fiduciary process on their retirement programs to deliver better outcomes for their employees. And I would say it's probably been about 7 years ago, an employer asked me if I could help them with a vendor search for an HSA provider. And as a good consultant, you say yes to everything. So I said yes. And I quickly got in the car and I Googled, what the heck is an HSA? And learned that these health savings accounts were amazing vehicles for people to acquire wealth for medical expenses, not only during their working career, but in retirement. And so that kind of started my journey into the healthcare side of kind of ERISA.
Interesting. And so what is an HSA account? I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. We're not going to go there today, folks. So describe to me, though, a little bit before you kind of even thought about that world. Where were you? Where'd you grow up? What was that like? What was your college experience like? How did you make the transition?
Yeah. So I'm the oldest of seven, and my mother and father are Catholic, Irish, Italian, so there were a lot of us. Uh,
I could relate. You throw German in and you got me. Go ahead.
Yeah, right. Um, and really, as a kid, I was always taught to question, not in a negative manner, a very respectful manner, but my mother always told me, ask questions, be curious. And so that's,
Wait, so not to interrupt you, but Greenleaf, I thought maybe she's Native American Indian. Like that's a very interesting last name.
yeah, I married into that name. My my maiden name is Cafaro.
Ah, now it all makes sense. Now it comes into crystal clarity. Gotcha. Okay.
So my whole life, I've really questioned things, been curious to say the least. To the point where my poor mother, I went to an all-girls Catholic school for the last 2 years of high school, and my mother was called in by the nuns, saying, your daughter has a tendency to always be questioning us, and nuns didn't particularly care for that. And my mother said, we've always taught her to be curious, and as long as she's being respectful, you shouldn't see that as a negative. So that's kind of what got me in and excited about helping employers was questioning, are your employees able to retire with dignity? And that's what my mother kind of always focused me on, is making sure that you had a meaningful impact on people that you came in contact with. So again, as a oldest of seven, I was always kind of a caretaker of my siblings. And that's kind of what I fell in love with in working with employers, really helping them to take care of their employees.
Wow, that's wild. So yeah, we do share that in common. So I went to St. John's University, so that's what, 16 years of Catholic school, by the time you add it all up. And they didn't do a good job with me. So, so I was also like a little bit of a rebellious kid. Couldn't stand wearing a uniform. Hated the shirt and tie and all of that stuff. But I kid somewhat because foundationally it was a really good education, despite my resistance to it. And what strikes me about you is that you're remarkable. It's not easy to start a business, period. um, it's always an uphill battle. And I look at someone like Elon Musk, that obviously, God knows when the man sleeps, because what he has done with running multiple, multi-billion-dollar industries is nothing short of phenomenal. But he talks about there being a time when it would have been much easier to be an employee, right? To than to start one business. And I don't think anyone can prepare you for starting a business. It's almost like you're signing up to go through the gauntlet. And I think when you're a woman or a minority, or the more hurdles that you have, um, headwinds that you have, I think the more kudos to the person that kind of weathers that storm. And you've built something pretty cool. So but I'm sure it didn't happen overnight. So tell us a little bit about your journey in business and what that was like for you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. My husband always says that I take the path least traveled instead of, and why do I always go the most, yeah, right. Why do I always, go the hardest route? But um, I, kind of coming out of college, I was one of the only female financial advisors in training. There were about 103 of us, and there were three women at that time, and they told us, look to your left, look to your right on the first day, and they said, these people won't be here next time. And I find it funny because if I look, actually the women were the ones that survived as opposed to the men. I think going through things like that and always kind of questioning and being curious, and perhaps being somebody that was kind of the minority actually makes you stronger. And every morning you have to get up and get excited about what you're doing, and that's kind of who I am as a person. So I think any journey of banging your head against the wall several times, which is what I have done for the last couple of years and kind of getting Fiduciary in the Box off the ground has actually been positive. I think it brings new energy to you, and I think it makes you stronger. So I don't see it as a detriment.
Not at all. And I think the truth is you work in business and you work and you work and typically it takes a massive effort to get, some momentum going. And in the case of Fiduciary in a Box, which, let's talk about that. I think we're at a point now where we're just beginning to scratch the surface in terms of employer and organizational awareness of, hey, this is an important box for us to check, and there can be some serious consequences and potential liability if we're not checking those boxes. I don't think, if you look at kind of a curve of adoption, the early adopters might have been all over this as soon as the law was introduced, but I certainly think that pool of folks is very, very narrow and very small. When you look at where we are today, I've heard more about the CAA and compliance, I'm going to say in 2024, probably as much, if not more, than all of the years leading up to this combined. And so I think we're at a point now where it's, folks are becoming aware. And, perhaps you can talk a little bit about that, because this started with finance, right? And 401ks and, being a fiduciary and an employer having an onus to spend, their dollars with their employees in mind. And then with the adoption of the CAA, it transitioned to healthcare. So talk to us a little bit about kind of the nuts and the bolts of that and where you think we are in space today, and should an employer care?
Yeah, so I'm going to take you back to 1974 because that's when ERISA was actually established. And ERISA has always,
Got to blow the dust off that. 74.
yeah, but ERISA has always covered health and welfare plans as well as retirement programs. The reality is that the standards, the fiduciary standard, were really kind of born in the retirement space because that was the first industry that was struggling. If you think about it, Social Security was not really established to provide income for 20 and 30 and 40 years of somebody's life. It was established to provide a limited income for a very short period of time. So employers started to establish the defined benefit plans to allow employees to retire and have additional benefits at retirement to supplement Social Security. The unfortunate thing is that the defined benefit plans became extremely expensive and difficult to administer. And so employers started to say to the government, hey, we can't continue to offer this benefit. It's almost unsustainable. And the Social Security system was not funded to provide employees to the ability to retire in their 50s and 60s and live until their 90s, and lifespans were increasing. So the government said, okay, we're going to allow you to start to withhold dollars from your employees' paychecks. And at that time, ERISA said, well, you're taking money out of their paycheck and setting it aside for their retirement. You need to actually have a fiduciary standard on it. And employers didn't understand what fiduciary standards were. When I first started in the industry, we still had defined benefit plans, and I was going around encouraging employees to withhold dollars out of their paycheck to set it up for retirement. And they would say, well, why would we do that? So that was a learning curve. But employers had a learning curve around what fiduciary standards look like and what it would cost them if they breached those fiduciary duties. Fast forward, you had the Pension Protection Act and you had 408b2s, and all of a sudden employers started to understand how to run a fiduciary process on their retirement programs. And now have a very sustainable benefit that's more than just a check the box that what it used to be. And employees are retiring with dignity. Um, so now we turn to healthcare. Healthcare has always been an area that ERISA has overseen, but the reality is employers used to provide this benefit at 100% of the employer's cost, and therefore there was no reason for ERISA to really step in. But all of a sudden, employers started to say this is becoming an unsustainable benefit for us. The costs are going up, the benefits are coming down. We need employees to start to contribute to this. So now we're going to start to withhold dollars from their paycheck in order to provide this benefit to them. So ERISA kind of stepped back in and said, okay, where is the fiduciary process? And employers said, well, we're struggling with that because we lack information. We lack what things cost and what quality looks like. And so, long behold, in 2020 and 2021, new regulations came to the market that added transparency to the cost of healthcare. We have the hospital pricing transparency, the transparency in coverage, and the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, which was actually signed in to legislation by Trump in 2020. This piece of legislation now is providing, in theory, employers with the ability to access data and access cost and quality of their healthcare plan. And so now they're held to a fiduciary standard. But the difference is that when the retirement plan started to withhold dollars, or when employers started to withhold dollars for retirement plans, employers didn't understand fiduciary standards. Today, they absolutely do. They run a fiduciary process on their retirement program, and now they're starting to understand they have to do the same thing on their healthcare plan, and they're looking for help because they know how to run a fiduciary process, but they don't know the questions to ask, and they don't have valued partners yet from the standpoint that'll take on some of that liability like they do in the retirement plan. So it's kind of a really interesting space to be in because I've seen this play out before, and employers are ahead of the healthcare market. And that means that the ecosystem that we know in healthcare has to change and evolve very quickly, or employers will, basically take it into their own hands and move into a new space because they understand what it means to breach those fiduciary duties.
So on a, if we're taking a 401k, for example, an employer, has a 401k and they offer a matching contribution. And let's say that, I don't know, they have Fidelity or Vanguard with, four different options. What are some of the things that they're required to do to adhere to a fiduciary, their fiduciary standard? I mean, I would think, how complicated could this be? Like there's here are four, mutual funds for employees to choose from. We offer a matching contribution. We'll sign the documents and we're good, right?
Well, ERISA is hard. The good news is that ERISA has established standards, these fiduciary standards, which means that there has to be a process that an employer goes through, and that they're providing an exclusive benefit at a reasonable price in the best interest of the participants and the beneficiaries. And they have to determine if what they have in place is in the best interest of the participants, and it has to be unbiased and conflict-free. And today, they have those options in the retirement plan. And so they establish fiduciary committees that review the the plan design. Is it actually providing a benefit to our employees? Is our company contribution optimized? Is it having meaningful impact on employees? Are we doing all of this at a reasonable cost? Are our providers conflict free? And is the quality of the funds that we're providing adequate to get employees to retirement?
I would guess they're also looking at the fees, right?
Yeah, fees are reasonable. So it's not about going with the cheapest provider. It's about determining if that provider is reasonable and deeming them reasonable. And I always tell employers, it's about, are you receiving a service for the fee that you're paying? And is that service actually having an impact on your employees? Because if you're paying for something and you're not receiving it, or you're paying for something and the service is not actually having impact, then how can you deem that reasonable? So as they start to look at the fiduciary process on their healthcare plan, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to establish a fiduciary committee, establish a charter. They're going to start to gather their information on the current plan, determine if the benefit that they're offering is actually providing a benefit to their employees, if the cost of the providers that they're using is actually reasonable under 408b2, and tweak it accordingly. And also understand the inherent conflicts that are currently in the healthcare market and try as best they can to kind of move into a conflict-free environment.
This episode of Broken Healthcare Podcast is brought to you by Benefixa Healthcare Consultants. Visit benefixa.com to learn what's possible. Reduce the cost of healthcare for your organization, deliver better outcomes for your people, and yes, design health plans that give your people a path to $0 out-of-pocket costs for healthcare. Visit benefixa.com today.
I would argue that it's a lot more complex and opaque in the healthcare industry than in finance. It's it's just an octopus, right? If an employer has, and an employer might think, okay, we're good. We're in a fully insured plan with an insurance carrier. What do we have to worry about? We're all fine. And then the next level would be, we're in an ASO relationship with the insurance carrier. We're relying on them to manage plan assets. And, they're practically $1 trillion company. I'm sure they're doing all right. They're fine. We're good. Is that an uncommon mindset for an employer to have?
That's a very common mindset. We're good. We've talked to our covered service providers, and they've told us we're all good. Don't worry about it. But you have to remember what happened in the retirement space. People used to think that it was very complex. If you look at the 403B market where you had multiple vendors offering benefits to employees with a non-for-profit and multiple investment options to choose from, it was extremely complex. What were the fees being charged? Who were the fees being paid to? What were these things called offsets? All of that had to kind of be fleshed out and become transparent so an employer could determine if what they had in place was appropriate. It's the same thing in the healthcare side. So if you think that the vendors that you're utilizing are acting in your best interest, they may be. But now you have to prove that they are, and you have to understand and ask questions about, tell me a little bit about what services I'm receiving for the fees that I'm paying. What are these fees that I may not know about? And where are they going and what are they for? And that's all part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act. There are 4 components that have really allowed employers to start to understand kind of their healthcare plan, the conflicts that may be within their healthcare plan, and giving and hopefully providing them with the tools to actually start to unwind some of these things that may not necessarily be beneficial to them and build a new ecosystem that is beneficial to them.
Yeah, because there's a lot involved, right? There's first and foremost, I don't think many employers read the contracts. They don't read, their administrative services agreement. They don't read the PBM agreement, and these are documents that are controlling, in some cases, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. In the case of an enterprise employer, $1 billion healthcare budgets. It's a lot of money at stake, and they have armies of attorneys to handle real estate transactions and you name it, this, that, and the other thing. But when it comes to this, it's kind of like, let's bury our head in the sand. We have bigger fish to fry. We don't want to worry about this. But they kind of do have to worry about it because there's potential liability and exposure and litigation. I don't know, are you familiar with any lawsuits on the financial side of things? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think that employers have been always put into a black box, and the market is highly conflicted and has always said, we've got you covered, don't worry about it. No need to ask questions because you can't do anything about it anyway, even if you do uncover that there's an issue. And again, that's what the Consolidated Appropriations Act was designed to do, to remove these barriers, to add transparency, and now to allow employers to actually act. They just are now kind of waking up to that. I mean, imagine sitting in a dark room for hours, for years, and then somebody turns on the light. It's very difficult to understand where you even are, let alone, what color the room is and what carpet's on the floor. And so I think that's where our employers are.
I turned on the light after a few hours in my bathroom this morning. It was dark. I shut the lights off again.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's where employers are today. But again, they're waking up very quickly to your point because there's definite risk associated with sponsoring an employer plan. But B, they also have this unsustainable benefit that's costing them millions of dollars and growing, and they have to start to actually become active as opposed to sit in the back seat and be a passive member. They have to become active in their healthcare plan. And
Yeah, and I don't envy them their position. So I have a real world client in the finance space actually. They're high profile. They're a recognizable brand. They're not huge in terms of employee count. They have less than 200 employees, and they're in a fully insured arrangement with one of the BUCAs, United Healthcare. It's a New York City client, and we were in discussions with them about the benefits of going to a self-funded arrangement, because their per employee per year spend was approaching $30,000 a year, and they requested data from United through their broker, who's a large privately held brokerage, very large, and they didn't get anywhere. United basically said, "No, it's a fully insured plan. We don't have to give you this data." And they actually put it in writing in a letter. And this was after the CAA was passed, by the way. I'm talking probably 2022 or maybe even 2023. Um, do you think it's appropriate for a broker to be a party to that? If Shouldn't a broker advise their client and frankly advise the carrier that they have a duty to provide that data under the law, as opposed to being passive and just kind of hiding behind that shield and saying, yeah, the insurance carrier doesn't want to hand it over, and they don't have to give it over. And I'm not trying to throw the broker under a bus. I'm just thinking, kind of on my feet, saying, well, if I was managing a multi-billion-dollar brokerage and a client of ours asked for data, even though I understand that it might not be in my best interest to provide that data because I'm making a mint on this fully insured plan that's paying me based on the premium that they spend, the more premium increases, the more revenue I get as a brokerage, and my financial obligation is to my duty is to my shareholders. So asking for this is certainly not in the best interest of the brokerage. But put that aside for a minute, and let's just say, do they have an ethical obligation to advise their client that they most definitely are entitled to that? And should they be fighting the insurance carrier on behalf of their client?
Yeah, I think most people are good people out there. Obviously, you're going to find some people out there that behave poorly, but I think brokers are just starting to wake up to the reality that um, there's a new way to play the game. If you think about it, consultants in the healthcare field have been paid by the BUCAs. They are product pushers, for lack of a better word, and not that they're not trying to act in the best interest of their plan sponsor, but they get paid through the carriers. And so it's hard to kind of bite the hand that feeds you, so to speak. But because of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, now the employer needs to start to ask questions. So the first part of the CAA requires that employers remove gag clauses from all of their contracts with their covered service providers. A gag clause is anything that prohibits that employer from accessing information around cost and quality and getting access to their data. Now, fully insured are slightly different, but this does apply to a fully insured as well as self-insured employers. So once they remove those gag clauses, now they have to attest that they actually have access to that information. This is not a broker's problem. It's not a TPA's problem. It's not a carrier problem. It's not a PBM problem. It is an employer's problem. They have to attest that they've removed the gag clauses and that they have access to their information. This now opens them up to the possibility of somebody saying, well, you knew because you attested that you had access to information and you knew what you were paying, and that's a problem because most employers don't even know that they have gag clauses, let alone that they had to attest. That's problem number one. And again, it's not a responsibility of any of the covered service providers, including a broker. But when we move to the next section of the CAA where it requires them,
Well, let me stop you there for a second, though.
sure.
So when you say you knew, so is there a document that an employer is signing every year that attests to that? And what is that document?
So they have to go on to the CMS website and attest that they have removed gag clauses from all of their covered service providers. The first attestation was due in 2023, and they have to do that on an annual basis. So by December 31st of 2024, employers need to go on and attest that they have removed gag clauses from all of their covered service providers' contracts. The problem is that most employers, A, don't know that they have to do that, and B, don't know if they've actually removed them because have you ever read one of those contracts? There are 30 pages of a lot of legalese that most people, even some of the really smart attorneys, don't know what they're looking at. So that's problem one.
I had one on my podcast yesterday. Julie, she was with me, and she was like, "I don't even know what it means."
Exactly. So Julie and I work closely together, and I think her advice to most employers is don't even try to remove the gag clauses because they're abundant, and in some cases you can't even figure out what one is actually a gag clause. But insert new language into the contract that basically nullifies and anything that is prohibited in the new regulations. And I know that's a great advice. And if you do that, then you can feel comfortable attesting that you've removed gag clauses because you have language in your contract that does that.
And when you say CMS, is that Center for Medicaid Services? What is CMS?
Yeah.
Okay. And so every employer is required by law, as of now, you said, right? December 2024, to attest.
December 2023 was the first one that they had to do. This is the second one, and they're going to have to do it annually. The fully insured employers are dependent on their carriers for signing off on that because the regulation unfortunately said either the employer could do it or they could have a third party do it. And that's the problem. So employers don't necessarily know.
Is it regardless of the size of the group, or is it?
It's regardless of the size of the group. Yeah. or fully insured or self-insured.
And what if they're on a New York State plan, for example? So it's not quote unquote an ERISA plan.
Great question. The CAA, this piece of the CAA applies to plans non-ERISA and ERISA, so it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Wow. So if you're an employer listening to this and you offer health insurance to your employees, then this is a requirement. This is the law. Wow. Very, very interesting.
The second piece of the CAA does only apply to the ERISA plans. And again, regardless of size, whether you're fully insured or self-insured, but it's receiving compensation disclosures from all of your covered service providers, your PBMs, your TPAs, your brokers, your carriers. And the compensation disclosure is required to disclose not only direct compensation, in which most employers may have a good handle on what direct compensation looks like, but the indirect compensation. And that's where all of the conflicts really kind of hide. And once they receive that under 408B2, they need to deem it reasonable, which is exactly what they do on their retirement plan. They receive disclosure of compensation and then they deem it reasonable of the service providers. Same thing they're going to have to do on the health side. Again, only applies to the ERISA-based plans, but if you look at non-ERISA, they traditionally will have some type of governing document that states that they have to be prudent with taxpayer dollars, and therefore they will want to receive these compensation disclosures.
Right. And, in speaking with Julie Selesnik, who is an attorney that specializes and focuses on this in ERISA law, it's not uncommon for a big box broker, a large private brokerage, or any broker for that matter, to include language to the effect of, there's other compensation that we receive that we can't share with you because it doesn't apply only to your group. Essentially, I'm giving you the cliff notes, right? To which Julie, would reply as an attorney, well, that's great. Take gather up your information on what you collected from the insurance carrier, divide it across your book of business, do some basic math, and get back to us with a number, which I thought is brilliant, right?
Yeah, best guess. And what did you receive last year? And, and and I find it funny that they'll say, "Well, we're not really sure." Trust me, everybody knows what they get paid. I don't know too many people that are so well off that they don't know what they're actually getting paid. They do. And so this is the game that's being played, and it was played in the retirement space as well. So it's not unusual when transparency comes to a marketplace that bad behavior is being called out, and now they have to evolve. And a lot of consultants are evolving. The problem is they have so many dead bodies hiding in the back that it's harder for them to unwind some of those. So it it's challenging, but it is required, and employers need to ask for it and demand it. And when they receive it, ensure that it's compliant, which a lot of them aren't. A lot of, to your point, Ray, as Julie said, a lot of them will have comments like, "We may receive uh, indirect compensation," or "upon request will disclose that indirect compensation." Well, guess what? That's where the litigation is going to be, because those are excessive fees. And as soon as you start to realize that you're paying for services you're not receiving, you have an excessive fee, and therefore it's a prohibited transaction, and you now have to actually act upon it.
Yeah, no doubt. It's amazing, the level of opacity and obfuscation. It's just it's mind-boggling. It really is. So now getting to fiduciary in a box, and I guess where I'm going with this, for those that are listening, because I commiserate with employers. It's not easy running a business. This throws another kind of level of complexity into offering benefits to employees, but it is the law, and you must comply with the law. But I think there's a silver lining here, because healthcare is typically a top SG&A expense, second typically only to payroll. If not second, typically it's a top 3 or 4 expense. And so, in going through this exercise, there really is an opportunity to shine a light on what is taking place in your health plan. And it's not just about understanding the compensation that maybe a broker is not sharing with you, but it's the other stuff. It's zeroing in on pharma. And I hate to, get political. It's not a red or a blue thing, but having President-elect Trump come out and say that he knows that what's going on with PBMs is, ridiculous. That's a true statement, folks. Like, love him or hate him, you want to kill him, you want to bury him, that's fine. But what he is saying there is spot on. When you look at Optum Rx, when you look at Express Scripts, CVS Caremark, et cetera, these organizations are middlemen and they exist to profit on your dime. And that is just truth. Period. End of sentence. And so when you shine a light on your expenses in healthcare and you go through the process of fiduciary in a box and examining those costs, I think there's a huge opportunity for you to uncover opportunities to save. And ultimately, that will be worth the price of admission. So I don't know if you agree with that or not, Jamie, but maybe you could take us through a little bit of kind of what the process looks like. And I don't know, does it depend on the size of the organization? If you're spending, $1 million a year versus $100 million a year, is the process very similar or is it different?
You're spot on. We definitely can reduce costs and enhance benefits. We saw it in the retirement space. The average account balance used to be $17,000 and it's now average account balance of over $100,000. The fees used to be 3.5% to 4%, give or take, and now we're at 25 to 50 basis points. All of this impacts the bottom line.
Wait, I'm sorry. Did you say 17,000 to 100,000 for the working stiff that's out there? That's meaningful dollars, and that's not just about inflation, right? That's crazy.
Well, it has to do with reducing the fees because the fees were eating away at the profit, the potential profits that that account may have been receiving. But it's also around plan design. Employers became proactive instead of reactive. And so it enhanced the ability for employees to save more and it pushed them to save more. And ultimately, through all of that, we've got a system that's working for employees, and that's the same thing that's going to happen in healthcare. Healthcare was established to help employers help the masses, and for those percentage of employees that had significant healthcare costs to kind of share that so that it wasn't a burden to one individual. And now it's out of control. Now it's about profitability, unfortunately, for everybody that's playing in the game. And the doctors, when they're able to work directly with the patients, the outcomes are phenomenal and the costs are reasonable. Walk into any doctor's office and say, I'm going to pay cash. You're probably going to get a better price than what your carrier might be charging. Why is that?
You might get seen sooner too.
Exactly. I mean, that's scary. So all of these middlemen are now profiting off of healthcare, and it's no longer healthcare, it's health insurance, and there might be some care. So we now just have to kind of rein those in. And I do think that PBMs have gotten out of control. I do think that there is a reason that we should still have PBMs, but we should bring them back to reasonable compensation. Just, they are a key component of an ecosystem for the healthcare plan, but they are not at the cost that they are currently right now. They're just sucking. They're leeches, basically, for the most part. And I'm generalizing here. Same with everybody else, unfortunately, in the healthcare space. So when an employer starts to put a fiduciary lens to their healthcare spend. And we know that 25 to 30 cents of every dollar is waste, fraud, and abuse. Imagine what a fiduciary procurement process could do for that employer. It doesn't matter if you're 100 employees or 100,000 employees, that's meaningful dollars coming back to your organization. And that's probably minimal. There's probably more. If that's today's market, 25 to 30%, and you start to understand who you're paying, how they're getting paid, the services that they're providing, and if there's any meaningful impact on those, and you can eliminate some of these, that's dollars back in your pocket that you can use for additional benefits, for hiring people, for raises. Doesn't matter the size of your organization. A fiduciary procurement process will make an impact on your bottom line, not only on your bottom line, but on the benefits that you offer.
No question. And well, the other thing that it does, though, is it puts everything in a nice, neat little proverbial box so that you have a paper trail. You have, a document trail so that if the DOL comes knocking, you're prepared for them, as opposed to saying, well, let us get back to you on this, right? And I think that is for any CFO that I know, they enjoy peace of mind. They enjoy comfort. I don't know too many CFOs that are risk takers. Most of them kind of lean heavy towards being conservative. And in this case, really, it's just a matter of them being prepared. Because if you're a large organization, odds are it's not a matter of, if they're going to come knocking. It's a matter of when they're going to come knocking. And are you ready for them?
Yeah, and I think it's going to go down a bit different than it did in the retirement space. The litigators went after the large organizations because that's where the money was. But what we're starting to see is the Department of Labor get involved and starting to dig around in the BUCAs and produce lawsuits among the BUCAs. And when they do that, they're uncovering self-insured employers that may be paying things they shouldn't. And where do you think that the DOL is going to go after they go into the BUCAs? They're going to go down to those mid-size employers. It's not necessarily, and then unfortunately, you may have the litigators that come right behind it. So I think this is going to be a little different than it went down in the retirement space. That said, we already have 3 class action lawsuits in the healthcare field for excessive fees and defunct tools and employees being pointed and guided to services that were not appropriate. So we've got problems. The bigger issue right now is that the attorneys haven't figured out the right mix to get some of these cases to the finish line with big dollar amounts. But trust me, just like they did in the retirement space, once they figure it out, they are going to they're going to be looking for low hanging fruit, and unfortunately right now most employers are low hanging fruit. They may be doing some great things, but if they haven't formalized it, they have some problems.
Yeah, and I think the landscape is just kind of ripe for the picking. If you look at what's going on out there, like the Heinz lawsuit with Aetna. I looked at that and I just said, there's no universe in which this doesn't get settled out of court. It's got to be like they're not gonna let this go to court. It's just fraught with waste and abuse. They don't have a prayer unless they're asking for just a completely insane amount of money. I don't think they have any choice but to settle. And I'm talking about the insurance carrier. And so I think, as we see, maybe over the course of the next, 24 months or so, we start to see the contract language change. We start to see the elimination of gag clauses. Then I think they have a shot, meaning the insurance carriers. And what are we saying? We're saying, you know what, guys, like the party's over. We've tracked your stocks going back to the 90s through Obamacare to today. You've done amazing things for your shareholders, but now there needs to be a reckoning. There has to be kind of a level set, because the market just can't sustain this anymore. And I don't know what you think, but maybe it's because I started a podcast called Broken Healthcare. But everywhere I look now, I'm reading a story or there's a headline about broken healthcare. It's people are tired, and I think they're done.
Well, I think people are getting bold and they're getting curious, and that's important because the pendulum has swung all the way to one side, and because it is becoming something that's unsustainable for both employers as well as employees. Now people have to figure out, okay, what's wrong? What happened here? And so I tell employers, you have to be curious and you have to be bold because this is not going to be easy. There's a reason that the CAA exists. There's a reason that Trump had to put in there that gag clauses had to be removed. I mean, that is insane that we actually have that that written into regulation that you have to remove gag clauses. Like that should give the hair on the back of your neck a reason to stand up. If there's a gag clause, there's an incentive there to withhold information, and that information probably has a lot of dollar figures attached to it.
Well, I think we probably also owe a debt of gratitude to Dave Chase, and the late Marshall Allen, because I think they had a hand in the drafting of that document. And if it weren't for them and their courage and their mission to help Americans with this problem, I don't think we'd be where we are today. So, shout out to those guys. Really, it's without that courage, and without getting back to your Catholic school days, you're being inquisitive and asking questions. Same is true with leadership in businesses. You have to be bold. You have to ask questions, and when you do, beautiful things happen.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great people out there that are working to change the system and change it in a positive way. I know Jeff Hogan was with the transition team yesterday talking about some of the issues in the healthcare space. And some of these regulations are helping, but they haven't put accountability to the right parties, and therefore there's still a lot of roadblocks for employers. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of good people out there fighting the good fight, and employers are starting to ask the right questions. And we hope that Fiduciary in a Box provides them with the ability to establish the process, adhere to it, and document it all in one spot and ask the questions they didn't know they needed to ask because you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's part of the problem. And to your point, you were just in a room in the dark for a couple of hours, and turning on the light was, difficult to figure out where you were. Employers have been in the dark for years, and now we're shining the light on this, and they need support. They need valued partners who are there sitting not at the table, but sitting on the same side of the table as them. And they don't have to be an expert in every area, but they do have to have the best interest of the employer at heart. And, that's what we hope that Fiduciary in Box empowers, not only employers, but consultants that are looking to help their employers and support them, again, provide those questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, so if you are an employer who's listening and you're interested, what is typically the process? Is Fiduciary in a Box employer facing? Would it be a service provided through a broker or a TPA? All of the above. How can someone take advantage of Fiduciary in a Box?
All of the above. So an employer can come direct to us. It is a collaborative system. We anticipate that they're going to invite their valued partners to participate in the process with them. But if they go to fiduciaryinabox.com, they can sign up for a demo, and we'll take them through exactly how they would sign up, establish the process, and invite whoever they want to the process or platform. Or if if you're a TPA or PBM or a brokerage that's looking to add value to your employers that says, hey, we are not fiduciaries, and in some cases we don't even know how to spell fiduciary, but we want to be a good partner of yours, and we're going to provide this service to you and sit at the table with you and walk you through that. It's like TurboTax is what most people have said. You don't have to be a CPA to file your taxes, but you go through a series of questions and it asks you to document everything. And then everything is right there in one spot. So if the DOL comes knocking or a litigator comes knocking, you have the whole process very well organized right in one system. And that includes both anything your TPA or PBM or broker or carrier has provided, as well as anything that you have established as a fiduciary committee or minutes or those types of things are right there at your fingertips.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. We'll include some items in, I guess, the show notes, some links on how to find you and all of that good stuff. But Jamie Greenleaf, Fiduciary in a Box, it was amazing. And until next time, folks, peace and love always. We'll see you on the next one.
So that's it for today's episode of Broken Healthcare. Head on over to iTunes or wherever you listen and subscribe to the show and join us on the next episode.